Welcome everyone to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy and I am an alcoholic.
And my name is Mick and I'm serving as your secretary as well today. Please join us in a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic, both inside and outside these meetings. And we've asked Steve to read the preamble.
Steve, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. They may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. AA has no dues or fees. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. And a warm welcome goes out to any newcomers and anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous. Our speaker today, I met her in Newry, and I met her in Newry at a meeting, and she turned up in Lanzarote. And I asked would she do the chair for me, and she said she wouldn't do it that night, but she did say she'd do it again for me. So all the way from Wardenpine, brought in the huge expense to Ryanair to Lanzarote. We have Josephine T. Where are you on, Josephine? Oh, there you are. Josephine, you got 45 minutes or 50 minutes, whatever it takes.
Don't worry,
So
Mom.
don't be in a hurry. We'll just keep these
I'll get
mute.
you some time for your bed. Don't worry. Do you want me to go ahead and start, Mosey?
Go ahead, love.
Yeah. Right, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Josephine and I'm a recovering alcoholic. A day at a time, I'm 42 years sober without having to take a drink. Now, I'll go back to the beginning, for I think it's important for us all to remember where we came from and what our background was and what else, you know. I was born in 1944, which makes me 80 a day at a time next week. I always say if I see it. And I came from a family of 12, 7 girls and 5 boys. My father had his own business in Belfast. He had his own bookie shop. Heavy drinker, but he certainly was an alcoholic. And my memories of those days were really good memories. You know, there was, as I said, there was 7 girls and 5 boys. I was the 5th youngest. And in 1952, he took a massive stroke. And he was confined to his chair. And not only was my mother looking after 12 children, she was also looking after my father. And that went on for 2 years, nursing him and looking after us. And he passed away one night very suddenly. And there she was left with 12 children. The eldest was 16 and the young was 2. And in them days in 1953, there was no money, I can assure you, you know, and it was hard going, you know, but, you know, she brought us up so well. Did it fit in? Well, me, I was always an attention seeker, you know. I never felt it, you know, I hear people talking, I never felt part of the family. It wasn't that I didn't feel part of my family. I just didn't feel, I was looking for me, you know, I was looking for me. I never was contented staying in my own home. I was always in somebody else's house because it's got the attention. And that went on, you know, and I went to the primary school and I didn't do too much at school and left school at 15, I think I was, and went straight into work. And we were brought up with a very bad fear of alcohol because my mother hated and detested everything about alcohol. So we were brought up with, you don't drink or you don't touch it, you know. And that was the way it was, you know. So I swore I would never, ever be involved with alcohol or meet anybody that, you know, with the alcohol. But Mark will know what I'm talking about. once a year on a Monday, there was what we called a general holiday. Entailed where I lived, Warren Point, and 2 mile out the road, Rostrevor. So they combined together, and there was a bus joined up, and they went to Dublin for the day. Now, that was the only outing I ever had in my life, you know. And I went in the bus that day, and that was the day I met my late husband. I was 15 and he was 16, and I met him when we were ready to leave Dublin, and he fell on the bus. He was that drunk. And then instant straight away, there was just something about that man. I just, oh my God, just fell in love with him. Just fell in love with him. And he sat down beside me and he talked the whole way home, and he was full of drink and you name it. But there's something about him that, you know, something about him, you know, and I wasn't one for, yes, I went to a lot of dances and I was a good dancer and whatnot, but I never was in relationships. So anyway, we met up a few times, but there was always alcohol there, you know. He was 16 and, you know, for that age, he took a lot of alcohol, but was he alcoholic? I don't know. I'm not here, you know, to talk to him, but he's part of my story, you know, so that's why I have to bring him into my story. So things happened from we were 16 right up till we were 21, you know, and we got married. I was 21, he was 22. And we went to Dublin first on our honeymoon. Those days you didn't travel too far. He had his own wee car. He was a service engineer for Hoover. He had a great job, you know. And I remember the night of my honeymoon, he locked me in the room in case somebody went in. He went down to the bar and he forgot he had newly bride up the stairs. And there was I didn't know how to use the phones or anything. I thought he'd gone and left me. And it was alcohol kept him away that night. You know, it played a big part in the start of our marriage, you know. And from that day on, you had 4 children in 4.5 years. My eldest was 5.5 when I had my 4th child, Cahill. That's my son. He's in the fellowship too. And things were very, very, very bad at the time, you know, I'll stress, I wasn't drinking. You know, I didn't drink. I hated everything about it, you know. But I lived with an alcoholic, you know. At that time, I didn't realize that my husband was alcoholic. I just thought he'd done things out of badness, you know. He was a binge drinker and he'd go away and maybe not come home for days, and he'd go on the drink for 3 weeks and then stop and save up the money. And money was very tight in my home, you know. All I did was try to keep a roof over my head and look after the 4 children. And that went on, you know, for quite a while, and a lot of violence come into the house too, as most of you know, and still I never ever thought of taking alcohol myself, you know. And I remember one night, you know, just I think he felt so guilty, you know, he asked me would I want to come out with him, you know, and there was a few local pubs. I lived in Rostrevor at the time, which is 2 miles from where I'm living now. And I went out that night and took my first drink. I didn't even know what to order. I think I took a sherry. And I remember saying, well, if that's alcohol, you can keep it. But it was rotten. It was like piss, if the truth be told. So I wasn't to take any. I think I was about 25 then anyway, and never was to take any. Still, the alcohol was rapid in the home, and I was left with no choice many a time but to call in the police. And, you know, if it wasn't the police, it was somebody else. And my brother-in-law and his wife lived next door to us. And I used to get the children, run in quick and get your Uncle Leo, come in and sort all the rows. And that went on for many years. And then at 27, I started to house drink. And within 10 years, it had crept up so bad on me. It was rapid. Now, I hear people sharing in AA that they drank for the effect of it. You know, I didn't drink for effect. I was the type of person could have mixed up with anybody. When I went through my schooling years, you know, I always got into trouble with authority, you know. I was taught by the convent nuns, and I couldn't say a word about them, bar that they were very physical, you know. I'm sure sometimes, you know, it was the way it was at that time, but I was always fit to stand up to them. I could have stood up to anybody. Didn't matter, you know. And I remember one occasion, you know, we got a new cured priest into our parish, and my cousin and myself, you know, my mother was very, very religious. And the only thing that kept that woman sane, and I'll never knock religion, you know, but it was the only thing kept her sane when she was sitting around 12 children on her own, you know. And we used to go down and pick up the family allowance and the pension. It was 10 shillings a week. That was what the money was on a Tuesday. And, you know, we didn't have much, but we got our wants, you know, and we got our needs, you know, and that was it. And, you know, that day you know, she always sent us out to the church. And, you know, looking back now, you know, I often say to my sisters, not a bit of wonder, we were at the chapel door at 7:30 in the morning, and back again that night to devotions, and back to the Holy Ark or something else. That was her way of getting rid of us, to give her head a bit of peace, you know. But I remember on that occasion, you know, my cousin and myself, we used to, there was sort of like a balcony looking over, and we used to fire papers down onto sea. In them days, the ladies wore hats. You didn't go into the church unless you had a hat in your head. And the ladies used to have all these hats, and we would see whose bit of paper hit the hat first. And there was a choir singing, and all they did in the choir was, there was men and women, and all they did was fucking kiss the whole way through the whole mass and whatnot, you know. But I was reported for doing this. And this guy, I'll not even call him a priest because he's no longer with us, but he's not worthy of the name. And he came up, I was down in, there was a big PE place, we played netball and that, and I can still see him. And he was marching over the green, and he's singing me out and my cousin out, and I thought, this is great, you know, the priest wants to talk to us, you know. And in them days, it was, if you had plenty of money, they wanted to talk to you, but the likes of us, no. But it turned out, anyway, it was because of our behaviour at church. We were reported on. And I remember he grabbed me here and he kept pulling me up, you know, and he kept spitting in my face, you know. To this day, I don't forget it, you know, and I can still see him. And I remember getting his hand, and I pushed his hand away, and I said, don't you dare put your hand on me. And the teacher who was with him told me to go home, that I was a disgrace, the way I behaved in front of this priest who was put up with a halo on his head. And I remember going home that day, and I thought, how am I going to go into the house and tell my mother that I was sent home because I stood up to this priest and whatnot. And I remember my mother, you know, I can still see her to this day, and she says, why are you home early? And then I proceeded to tell her. And straight in her coat went on, and straight she went up to him. And I can tell you, she left that man with a red face. But why I'm sharing that bit was, a few years back, he had molested so many children that was hidden, and it only came out after he passed away. And that was the guy that was put up on a pedestal, you know. And when my son went, he was vice principal over the college in Uri. And my son Cahill went to the college. And I remember the day of the introduction, I took Cahill up, and he was sitting the other side of the table. He didn't recognize me, but I certainly recognized him. But this was long before any of this talk came out about him. And I remember him, he said to me, and who are you? Oh, I says, you know me. Oh, no, I don't know you. Oh, I says, well, I know you. And anyway, he turned around and I said, do you not remember? I said, you were the one I said went to slap me across the face. Oh, was that you? He says, and he was very great to my brother. But at that time, there was no talk about it. But, you know, it never stopped me from believing. I don't knock religion, and I'm not here to talk about religion. I'm here to talk about spirituality. But my God I have today is somebody that I can trust. You know, I keep my faith private. You know, I don't have to exploit it or that, you know. But that was a wee incident, you know, that I was brought up with. But anyway, I'll go back to, you know, I was introduced to the fellowship, and I'm sure most of the women may have heard of Al-Anon. My sister, who was a pioneer all her life, she knew of a man in Warren Point. He was a solicitor, and she knew that he had a drink problem and that he'd got sober. And she said, I'll take you around. So in Roundham, he lived round the shore in Warren Point, and her and I went round to him, and he became actually a really good friend of mine and my late husband's in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, Josephine, I can't do anything for your husband. But what I can say to you is there's what we call, he said, is a fellowship of Al-Anon. He said it's for men and women who have alcohol problems within the home. And he said, give it a try. And he gave me the name of where it was in Uri. And I was willing at that stage because my marriage was in an awful state, you know. I know I could no longer live with the way things were, you know, with the alcohol in the home. It was horrendous. And I went to Al-Anon, and I was in Al-Anon for over 2 years. And the girls they were mostly all women at Al-Anon at that time. And then in that time, I started to take drink. It started off once on a Friday night. Used to love, couldn't wait till the Friday night come. I didn't drive. I used to have the bicycle. I used to go down the street to the off license and take up. It was a quarter bottle of vodka then, you know. And within a short period of time, you know, the alcohol crept up in me. Now, if it was bad, when my husband was drinking, I can assure you, when the two of us was drinking, it was hell upon earth. And the only ones to suffer were my 4 children. You know, how they came through what they came through, I don't know. And, you know, I couldn't see no better, you know. I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, I'd heard it mentioned in Al-Anon, you know, and I have a lot to be grateful for that fellowship of Al-Anon, you know. And, you know, it started then, you know, drink wasn't enough for me to get attention. I was starting to throw overdoses of tablets in me, and before I knew it, there was an ambulance at the door, and I was shipped off to the hospital. And the 4 children, the eldest, I think, was 10 at the time. Cathal and Deirdre were the youngest. And that went on so many times, you know, and my mother-in-law used to step in, and my husband didn't even know that I had been in hospital, for he was away binging, you know. It wasn't his fault, he didn't know. And I remember my last drink was in 1982. And I was only after the 3rd overdose, and it was only attention seeking. I never wanted to take my own life. As sure as I put those tablets in my mouth, I lifted the phone and I rang an ambulance. I did not want to die, but I was an attention seeker. And I remember the last drink was, I said, in 82, and my 3 sisters were standing down at the bottom of the bed, and they were crying. And I remember one of them saying to me, Josephine, would you not do something about your drinking? And, you know, even in my head was telling me I'm not that bad, you know, I'm not that bad. But But where I reached my rock bottom that night was social services. They're standing at the bottom of the bed to come in. My sister stepped out. And he asked me, my two younger children were underage. And they asked me where they were that night and who was mine. No. And I have an awful lot of gratitude for my late mother-in-law, you know, and I put that woman through hell. And she stepped in because they were underage, or social services would have taken them. And they told me that in the hospital that night. And I remember that night saying, what if I'd lost my two children? You know, I know nobody else can get us sober, only ourselves. But I can tell you, my rock bottom was when I knew that I was going to lose two of my children. And I come home that night, and Don didn't even know that I'd been in the hospital. And I made a decision that night that I was going to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, well, the first AA meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous for me to go to was in a place called Newry, which was 8 miles from where I lived. And my means of transport was the service bus. That was the only way I had of getting to that meeting. And I remember getting on the 10-8 bus. The meeting started, I think, 8:30, 8:15 or 8:30. And I got on the bus and it dropped me off at the Mall in Newry. And I run from the Mall in Newry right up to the top. It was called Catherine Street, right up to the top of there. And I remember coming in that Friday night, and I never forgot it. And I came into the room, and I was the only woman there that night. I was 37 years of age, coming 38. And I come in anyway, and the men all welcomed me. And did I hear much? No, I didn't, you know. I didn't even know how stupid I was that night. Now, you know, the way we call them out, you know, when people come into the room, you know, we do at home is you take the names down, we call them out, you know, as they come in order. I couldn't even wait. I asked, could I speak? I was in such a state, you know, and then Alcoholics Anonymous, what they are, nobody stopped me. They told me, you go on ahead, Josephine. And that was the night that I knew there was something in that meeting that I needed to keep the most important thing in my life. And I had to sit my husband down the next morning. You know, he was in an awful state when he heard that I had gone back into the hospital again with the same carry on. And I remember saying to him, you know, Donald, I'm not stopping you from drinking. If you want to drink, you go ahead and you drink, but you're going to have to let me get sober. You see, he suffered from an awful thing of jealousy. I never ever give him any reason, never. I married him in 1966, and to the day when he passed away, I never had anybody else in my life, only him. And I never gave him any reason, but he was just the alcohol. It just created all that emotions in his head, jealousy, anger, hatred, and all that, you know. And, you know, I went to many meetings. It was so, Newry was the only place at the time, and many nights I got it very hard, you know, to go out of the house because he was following me, you know. I didn't drive at that time, and I was taking the bus, and this is the way I did that. I went to many lengths to stay sober because I didn't want to drink, you know. There was probably more drink left in me, but it wasn't up here, you know. I remember one occasion, one night, you know, 3 men from AA meant no harm, but this is where you have to be very careful. When you're dealing with an alcoholic within a home, you have to be very careful what you're doing. And the 3 men, I was at a meeting in Moran Point that night, and these 3 men called at my house to say that I want to go to a meeting in Newcastle, which I never was in a meeting in Newcastle in my life, and I've never been in a meeting in Newcastle in my life. And for whatever reason they wanted to call for me, I don't know. And when I come home that night, my daughter said to me, Mommy, 3 men called for you to take you to a meeting. I says, what? And the first thing I said was, Daddy there? And she says, yeah. And I thought, oh my God. So he had gone back out drinking that night. And we walked the roads at 1 o'clock in the morning, me and my 4 children, because of that incident. I remember going up the next night to that meeting in Uri, and the 3 men were there. And I pointed the 3 of them out. I didn't care. I was so, and I told them. And I said, never again, I never took a lift with anybody because I had to protect myself. Not only myself, I had to protect the sick man at home. If the shoe was on the other foot and he was driving up to the car with a crowd of women, and that was the way it was. That was my experience, So then things got really, really bad, it got so bad that it was uncontrolled. I couldn't live anymore the way it was, and I sat the children down. Anne was 17, she was the eldest, and as Cal was, I think, 12 at the time, he was the youngest, and the second girl was in the middle of doing O-levels for grammar school, very clever girl, and I said, we're going to have to move out of Rostrevor. I said, I had to protect my sobriety, there was still enough arouse in the house, and I decided then to move back to my hometown of Warren Point. And that was in 1985 on the 15th of August. I never forget that day. And we packed up and we went. And prior to that, a week before that, I had to get my husband removed out of the house that night. I was left with no choice. I was left with no choice that night. And I had to call the police in and get him removed. It was so bad, And that was when I made that decision. I would move back to Warren Point. And I moved back, as I said, on the 15th of August. And my eldest girl gave me a lot of trouble, because she had her friends in Rostrevor in her home, and through a rough time with her at that time, and but in that time, in that short space, I remember hearing through the grapevine that my husband had gone to Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, me been having a head I had, even at that time, we had started a wee group up and running in Rostrevor, we didn't know much about the principles of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. All we wanted to do was get a wee group up running in Rostrevor. And we had to take down a lot of the people from Newry group to show us how you do it and introduce the program to us, and that, all we concentrated on was getting an AA room opened, And, God love him, he sent the clergy to me, I worked for the nuns at that time, I was their cook. And I remember him coming up to me and saying, Josephine, Don wants, will you take him back? He said, hey. And when I said, no. I couldn't trust him. I couldn't put my children through that again after moving them from the place they were born and reared and take them into the place that I was born and reared and upend the whole lot again, But I did miss him terrible. There's no point in saying it, and I was driving myself at the time with a wee green car, and I used to drive out to Rostrevor and could I see him, and I did that many nights, and, fate been fate. I happened to go down to the square in Warren Point one night, and his car was sitting in the square, and I went over to him, and I said to him, how are you keeping? And his face, and to this day, I can see the smile in that man's face, And he says, will you get in to talk to you? And I says, what do you want? And he says, Josephine, he says, I miss you and the children desperate. And he says, I'm really putting the effort in the air. He says, I do. He says, there's something about Alcoholics Anonymous. He says, I've come to see that you know, of a real bad problem. Would you give me a second chance? You know, and I looked at that night, you know, and I said to myself, we all deserve a second chance in life. People give me a second chance. You know, I seen the time that my siblings walked across the other side of the street when they used to see me coming when I was drinking. Didn't want to know me, they were ashamed of me. You know, and who was I to be judge and jury of him? So, you know, I said to him, I won't be back at Rostrevor. You know, if you want to come, you know, you can come here. I'm not putting the children through anymore. And he said, no, I'll come to live, you know. And, you know, the man that I was married to, and Mark will know who I'm talking about, they never left Rostrevor. He was the first name of that particular generation ever to come to Warrenpoint to live, you know. So what I said to him that night, go and talk it over your mommy and see what your mommy has to say. And mommy says, you go where your heart is. And that was in 1985. And we never looked back. And he went to his meetings. I went to my own meetings. We didn't go together. It wouldn't work. Wouldn't have worked. He had got himself a great sponsor. I had nobody. I was an Alcoholics Anonymous for 3 years and did nothing. All I did was talk about me. I never talked about program because I knew nothing about it. You know, that was the way it was for 3 years. And I remember he was coming home, you know, and I was telling him where he was going wrong. I was telling that man, and that man was on a program, and I was telling him he was doing it all wrong. Do you not know that I was an Alcoholics Anonymous 3 years before you? And that was the way I put that man through hell. He was living with somebody that was not wise in the head. And I remember he turned around and he said to me, if you don't leave me alone, I'm leaving. Because my sobriety is more important at this minute in time. And I went in and lifted the phone that night and I rang a girl in Uri. I loved her sobriety. I knew she was on a program and I just loved the way she talked, you know, and her stories were all, I could identify with them, you know, and I lifted the phone that night and I said, Jennifer, she's no longer, she passed away there last year. And I said, Jennifer, would you help me? I need sponsorship. And she says, certainly. She was down with me the next night. And that was when my life changed. Because I did something about myself. I did what we all know is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was one step in particular, as we all know, the 4th and 5th step, you know, there was no way that I was going to do that with anybody. Because I had a very bad experience of a child at 9. I was 9 years of age. I had a very bad experience, and that actually, when I was 14 years of age, I had a mental breakdown, and my mother didn't know what was wrong with me. Because when I came 14, I realized what had happened, and I blamed myself, you know, and no way was I going to open up that to anybody. And you know something, I did that and it was meant nothing. You know, it was nothing. It was nothing. But I made of that, you know, the pain that brought in my life was dreadful. I knew I was able to go down that night and pray for that person. You know, and I thought, you know, I was an uncle within the family, you know, and I thought I was the only one, you know, me being me, that this had happened to. And it turned out, you know, 4 members of my siblings, my sisters, the same thing had happened to them, you know, and I wasn't on my own. And, you know, Donald and I, you know, we honestly, we bought our own house, you know, up or not too far from where I lived, you know, and we never could pay bills, but we bought our own house and I was working holding down 3 jobs and he had a good job. He worked for service engineer for Hoover. And we went on a holiday, you know, we got our first holiday in 85, I remember that, you know, and, you know, things started to turn around and, you know, we had a happy home. And then we bought, the house we bought, we had, we had 20 years of it, but the mortgage paid for it. And I remember saying to him, you know, what about at that time, the house boom, it was good, you know, it was a boom, I think it was around the 90s. And I remember saying to him, what about putting our house up for sale and see what we get for it? I said, we can't even afford a holiday. You know, the three of us was working, you know, and he wasn't happy about it. And the people I worked for at that time, she was a solicitor and her husband was an accountant. And I remember mentioning it to her husband, and he said to me, Josephine, you put the house up, it's a good time, you know, you get big money for it, blah, blah, blah. And we did get really good money for the house, if truth be told. And we had a great holiday every year. It wasn't part of America, we didn't go to. And we travelled a good bit around the world, you know, and we were happy, you know, and then came you know, as most of us knows, you know, some business meetings, you know, too many chiefs and not enough Indians, you know, go to a business meeting sometimes and you can get hurt, you know. I got very badly hurt one night, you know. I was the only living member left of that group in Restreva. They'd all passed away. And I thought I couldn't be done without. I can assure you, the best in the world can be done without, because Alcoholics Anonymous can go on. We're only a member. And I remember I was accused of something that I didn't do that night. They wanted me out. And I suppose in one way, rightly so. I thought I was Miss AA. I thought I owned that Restreva group. I was only not a member. But I had that much big ego. I was doing it my way. And they couldn't wait to get me out, you know. So they had to plan something. So the plan worked. And I remember leaving that group that night, and I cried the whole way home. And I was saying, how am I going to go back? People are accusing me of stealing money. You know, I didn't take money. The money was short, but I'd only taken over from the previous treasurer. And then I thought everybody was talking about me. And I remember coming into the house and Don was sitting in the wee room. And I daren't tell him, for he would have went out and he would have lynched every friggin' one of them up. And he would have done that. So I remember saying to him, I'm going to give Alcoholics Anonymous a wee break for a while. That break went on for 18 years. And my husband stopped going for those 18 years. Did I take a drink? No. Did he take a drink? No. People ask me in Alcoholics Anonymous how I stayed sober or he stayed sober. Only for the grace of God of that program, you know. That's what kept me sober. Kept him sober. I'm not saying we had a bed of roses. We hadn't. I never went through as much. From I got sober, I never went through as much. But I was able to cope with life, you know. Life dishes anything, you know. I had broken marriages within my home. I had a daughter that lived with an alcoholic husband. You name it, it was all fired and mommy, and I was hiding an awful lot away from my husband because he couldn't deal with it. But you know, I dealt with it, you know, I dealt with it and everything. And I wasn't going to meetings. You know, and we had we had a few really good friends, and both my husband and myself. And not one of them ever said to me, why are you not going to meetings? Nobody ever said that to me. You know, nobody pointed the finger and said, you should be going to meetings. You know, and days went into weeks, weeks went into months, and months went into years. And 2017, I was dealt with the worst blow that I could ever have in my life. We were planning to go back to America. And my husband was 73 at the time. And he felt unwell. And every time he used to eat food, the food would stick in his throat. And he used to make these really bad noises. And I used to think that he was putting it on. And I used to say, Don, you couldn't have a hiccup like that. You could have heard it a mile away. And you say, the food's sticking on me, Josephine. But never in my wildest dream did I ever think that we were going to be faced with what we faced with. You know, and I started to liquidize his food so he could swallow. And I remember, you know, keep saying to him, because he suffered from rheumatoid arthritis and he had a few other underlying issues, but nothing say he was a fine man and a fine looking man, you know, and he never drank nor smoked for over 30 years. And I remember sending him out to his own GP and he was never there because in them days they started, you couldn't see your own GP, they were shoving you in somebody else. And then they were putting it down to a reflux. And this was going on, you know, with this reflux. And I remember he came in here to the kitchen where I am living now, and he was standing there, and his mother died from esophagus cancer at the same age. And I remember him saying to me, you know, Josephine, I think I have the same thing as Mummy. And the minute I heard that, I got straight on the phone. And shows you where God works. And his GP happened to be there that day. And I said, would you tell Dr. McLaughlin that I need him to ring me? And the reception says, what's it about? I says, I'm not prepared to tell you my business, but you tell him to ring this number. So the phone rang at 11 o'clock. And it was Dr. McLaughlin. And he said, could I speak to Don, please? He called him Don. I said, no, it's me you want to speak to. Oh, he says, so what can I do for you? I said, it's what you can do for us. What you can do for my husband. So he said to me, tell him to come out to see me at 3 o'clock. And I went out with him, but never. I knew they would send him to put the camera down, but that was all I wanted to hear, to get the camera down. Then it was a blockage here, blah, 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 end of story, you know. And a week later, he was referred to Craigavon Hospital. And my eldest girl took us down. It was her, myself, and Don. And we went down to Craigavon Hospital. And I couldn't understand why he was so long in, you know. And I kept saying to him, your daddy's awful, you know, still never, ever dreaming, you know, what we were going to hear. And 2 white doctors come out and still see them. They were lady doctors and said, Mrs. Tinley, we're here to talk to you about your husband. And I said, what? I said, we can't get the camera down. There's a blockage. We don't know whether it's a tumor or what it is. He said, we have to refer him, he says. And I never, to the day God calls me, will I ever forget that day. You know, it lives in my memory. And I went in and he was sitting in the wheelchair, you know, and he just said to me, it is what it is. That's the words he said. And he never spoke of his illness from that day. And the day passed us away, he never spoke. And he says to me, will you promise me something? And I said, I'll do anything that I can do. He says, don't let me go into any hospitals. Will you keep me at home? And he was diagnosed on the 12th of August and he passed away 5 months later. About 5 months ago. And Cahill, my son, in the meantime, he had got into the fellowship. He's over 20 years sober. And Cahill and I nursed him the whole 5 months. We didn't want, you know, the nurses come in and give him the morphine and whatnot and that, you know. But anything, I was his nurse, his carer and everything. And I slept at the bottom of the bed with a pull-out bed. And I did that for 5.5 months till he passed away. And I remember one day, you know, pain's a wonderful thing, you know. I was up at the graveyard shortly after he died. And in that time, you know, there's a wee bit of aggro crept in, you know, with a few in-laws, you know, One in particular, you know, she called here the poor woman meant no harm, but she called on a day that he was very, very ill and we couldn't let her in, and she took offence to it. And my daughter was married to her son and it created an awful row, you know. And I remember that day up at the graveyard, I met a friend of his and I lost my head. I totally lost my head. I called he was a member of the fellowship. And I called because he was a good friend of Cahill's, my son, you know, and I felt that he pushed him away where he should have been there from when the father died. This other person become more important, you know, and my head was gone, you know, my head was gone. I remember walking in that graveyard, you know, and I looked at the phone and I rang a cousin of mine who's in the fellowship for over 50 years. I says, Tommy, I'm in an awful state here. He says, what's wrong, Josephine? And I told him, he says, stay away from people like that, you know. And I said, right. And I came down to the house and Cahill was here, and son. And I said, Cahill, I'm going to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he says to me, Mommy, do you know that if I'd have said to my children, there's £1,000 each for you, I don't believe they would have taken the news. They would have taken my news any day. Because he knew I was ready for cry. There was only two ways I could have went. It was either up or down. That was all I was left with, you know. And, you know, he looked up meetings for me at that time. I didn't want to go back local, for I felt people would be looking at me and be talking about you. Bear in mind, it was 18 years, you know, from I was back. And there was a place called Banbridge, you know, and I remember saying to Carol, you know, get me as far, you know. So I drove the car down, never forget it, you know, prayed to God the whole way down the road. Hadn't a clue where I was going. Hadn't a clue. I remember I drove up and down the road and up and down the road and couldn't find the rooms. And this woman was walking her dog. We talked about breaking your anonymity, but I didn't give two shouts. And I said to her, would you know where the AA meeting is? And she looked at me. Oh, she says, I think it's down there. So I drove the car down and they were all standing outside and they were smoking. So I knew then I was at the right place. And I remember going in and there was a guy from Warren Point where I lived. He's Danny B and Mark Noam, and he's over 50 years sober. And he was there that day. And I sat beside him and I said, Danny, this is my first meeting back in over 18 years. And he put his arm on me, he says, you'll be all right. And that's over 5 years ago. And I still go. Why do I go? I go to keep my head right. I don't think of alcohol today, if the truth be told. I'm not cured of anything. But it's dealing with life on life's term. I still have troubles. But what do? I try to walk away from them. I still live with people. I have a daughter, my second girl. She's hard work. She's hard work. She would have been the one that suffered the most through our alcoholism in the house. There's always one that suffers more. You know, and I remember she used to stand at the top of the stairs. And she used to scream. I could see her to this day. Mommy and Daddy, stop fighting. You know. And she had left her nervous. So her marriage broke up after 2 years and she was left with 2 young boys. And those boys today are a credit to that mother, a credit. And that's the truth, you know. And she reared them on her own with the help of me and Don. My late husband, be with all the faults he had, but he was one good man. And they always say, behind every good man there's a good woman, and I can assure you that's true, you know. But, you know, my granddaughter's in the fellowship now, and, you know, she was a golfer, you know. Her father was a great golfer, and he lost everything through alcohol. But, you know, he's sober today and he's all right, you know. But she you know, all my husband ever wanted for her to get her career in the golfing end, you know, and He used to take her and my other grandson, and he'd just travel the whole length and breadth of Ireland with them, you know. And he he loved that, you know, he just loved that, and he got that buzz, and then he got ill, you know, and he never got to see where she is today. Where she is today is the gratitude of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, she was not in a good place 6 years ago. If the truth be told, we were very concerned about her. She was mixed up with the wrong people. There was drink, there was drugs, you name it. You know, when she came up to me one night and was sitting in the front room, and she said to me, Nanny, she said, I'm ready to go crazy. I need to talk to a psychiatrist. I says, do you, doctor? Do you, Tara? Why do you want to talk to a psychiatrist? She says, my head's gone. And I knew she was drinking. She lived with me, you see. You know, she lived with me for a long time. Her and the mother couldn't get on, and the father, you know, and I took her in, me and my husband took her in. She was she loved, Martin knows her, she's the loveliest girl. She was the way she set up all this thing for me. And I said to her, do you not think you've a problem with drink? And she says, I think it's my head. I said, tell you what, just give Alcoholics Anonymous a try. And if it's not for you, walk away. I told the same to Cal, my son. I met him one day over coffee, and he was married to Mark, do not mind me saying, he was married to Mark's sister. The marriage wasn't right from the start. They both were good people. When the marriage broke up, I took her side for the pure and simple reason she was left with 2 children. And I look as a mother to a mother. It's all right, I often say the man can get up and walk away, but when you have duties to children, a mother has to be there. You know, I knew the marriage wasn't right, you know, and I remember he stayed off drink because a baby was on the way and hadn't taken a drink for 3 years, and his fucking head was wrecked. It was wrecked. And we sat in Shelburne in Newry over a cup of coffee, and I just said, I never rammed Alcoholics Anonymous down anybody's throat. But what I always said was, give it a try. And if it's not for you, walk away, you know. And I remember saying to him, you know, that I'll try Alcoholics Anonymous or talk to somebody. I know somebody that would suit you to the ground. I do believe you have to be careful. You need to get the right person. If a younger person's coming into the fellowship, I do believe you need to have the right person on a one-to-one talking to them. And you are Cal never lied. Cal's 22 years sober, you know. That's not down to me. That's down to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, Tara's just left her. Tara went over to Portugal. She got her degree and all, went over. And she's now had a powerful job here and down the south of Ireland teaching golf. And you know, I go to bed every night and I've done on my photograph sitting on the side of the bed. And he's smiling on his face because it's all ever he wanted were his children. He wasn't a bad person. Alcohol took all that away. But we got it all back through this fellowship. And you know, the gratitude that I keep it simple today, you know. I'm coming 80 next week, a day at a time. I still keep myself active. There's a lot of dementia within my family. 3 of my sisters is bad with it. I keep my head right. I go to 5 and 6 meetings a week. I do the morning meetings, where it suits me. I don't like going out late at night. I don't like coming in the dark. So I go to the early meetings, 10:30 to 12 o'clock. I love them. And I go tomorrow morning meeting in Camla. You know, and I just say, where would I have been if I hadn't got back to Alcoholics Anonymous? I do believe I had been dead. You know, a day at a time. I was 42 years there in April past without having to take a drink. You know, and I wish us all well. And that's all I'll say.
Thank you very much, Josephine. It was good to have you here. So that's it. Sober through any and all conditions, and that's what was drummed into me from day one. There you go. Mick, if you had to say,
Yeah, I'd like to thank Josephine for sharing. You know, Josephine, I agree with what Mossy said. You know, I've had many in sobriety, many excuses to take a drink, but I've not yet found a reason. You know, and that's what you came over when you said to me, you know, just now you said that, why do I still come? To keep my head straight. I identified so much with that. Thank you, Josephine. Over to you, Vicky.
you had to screw it up on me, Mick.
Well, someone's got to, haven't they?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Vicky B. I'm an alcoholic. Josephine, thank you so much. That was a wicked share. As others have shared, I could have listened all night. The AA promises, 9-step promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Thank you, Vicky. And thanks to all the co-hosts, especially thanks to Josephine and our timekeeper, Kathleen, and the old mate, Mick the Ferret.
And Steve, don't forget Steve, who's done the preamble.
Steve, yeah,
And, you know, I ain't going to thank you though, Mossy.
that's okay.
Bye.
And I think that's it. The yellow card, Mick, who you see here,
What you hear here,
when you leave here.
let it stay here for the safety of the people in the group.
Good man. Jeff will be enabled as we close the meeting. And Josephine, will you lead us out with this friendly prayer?
God grant me serenity
Serenity.
Friend.
to accept the things I cannot change, courage to
Courage to change the
change
things I can,
And the wisdom
To
to
know
know
the
the
difference.
difference.
Bless you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Coming back.
everybody.
Thank you, Josephine.
Josephine,
What a
wonderful chair.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
everyone.